Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, ActiveState, the Open Source Languages Company. Today's webinar will be presented by Bart Copeland, CEO of ActiveState, and Tom Radcliffe, Director of Engineering for ActiveState. In today's webinar, they will be covering the history of ActiveState and how we got to the Open Source Languages Company, or OSLC as it's referred to internally. Bart and Tom will also discuss why enterprises need open source and more about Ruby, Go, Lua, and node.js, ActiveState's newest language distributions. They will also touch upon why ActiveState language distributions make sense for enterprises and what ActiveState intends next for Perl, Python, Tcl, and Komodo. Finally, Bart and Tom will end this presentation with a QA session, hoping to answer as many audience questions as they can in the remaining time. Any questions that are missed will be followed up on after the webinar. Now let's join Bart and Tom as they begin.
So, ActiveState, the Open Source Languages Company. For those of you who've been following us, on November 1st of this year, 2016, we were super excited to announce that ActiveState going forward is the Open Source Languages Company. We are focused exclusively now on open source languages. That is our raison d'etre, that's our reason for being, it's our core focus, and we are very excited today to expand on why we did this. Because when I go into the history lesson, you'll get a better idea of what the rationale was for behind this. So, but what we may not know is, if you go to the next slide, actually, before I do that, the whole spirit of this talk today is to talk about the why, what, how, when, and who related to the Open Source Languages Company, to give you a better sense of what we're all about going forward. But what you may not know is that we are actually celebrating our 20th anniversary coming up here in 2017. ActiveState has been in business now for almost 20 years. Next year will be 20 years. This is quite a remarkable achievement. If you think about it, we started 20 years ago in 1997 when open source, nobody even knew what open source was. And for the first 10 years, the majority of the industry didn't even speak to open source. So we were at the forefront of open source, but before open source was a common household name. Now, today, everyone knows about open source. And it's no longer that mysterious type of technology that had been for many years. But given we're celebrating our 20th year anniversary, there's something that is key to ActiveState since day one. And the next slide will show you that. What is key to ActiveState is three things. Every single product that we have built at ActiveState since 1997 has been based on open source technology. The next key thing is every single product that we make is focused for developers. And when we say developers, we mean developers, open source community developers, we mean developers in their garages, we mean developers in large enterprises, we mean developers that are doing hard cutting edge coding, we mean IT developers, the full spectrum. Developers mean anybody that is using and working with software. And then the third constituent that's common to ActiveState is the enterprise. Companies of various sizes, predominantly medium-sized and large companies that are working with our solutions or want to work with our solutions. And what we do is we take open source software and we package it for developers, but we also package it for enterprises in a way that it works well for the enterprise. And we often say at ActiveState, we're building solutions that just work. That's what we try to do. We're not always successful at it, but we're constantly trying to build solutions that just work. So with that foundation in place, I'd like to go back to 1997 and talk about ActiveState 1.0. So, and using these three circles, if we go to the next slide. So at ActiveState 1.0, it started with our tools and languages business. Our tools and languages, specifically, we became famous for porting Perl to Windows in the late 90s. And we started doing hundreds of thousands of downloads of Perl for Windows, as well as downloads of our other products, which I'll touch on in a minute. During the late 90s and early 2000s, we then built a product based on Perl called Pure Message. It was an anti-spam product for the enterprise. So our business grew around these two product lines. But then in 2003, Sophos acquired all of ActiveState. Sophos is a company that specializes in security solutions based in the UK. They acquired all of ActiveState, but they really ultimately just wanted the pure message product line. They grew the pure message line to substantial sums and numbers, and to this day, it's still a product within Sophos product mix. But the tools and languages business was orphaned within Sophos. Orphaned, not that it was a bad business, it just wasn't core to Sophos. So then in 2006, that leads to the next slide, which is ActiveState 2.0. In 2006, the tools and languages business spun out of Sophos. And basically, at that point in 2006, ActiveState carried on with its tools and languages business. So if you go to the next slide, the tools and languages business grew within this three concentric circles of open source developers and enterprise, and we had Perl, we had Tcl, we had Python, we had Komodo or IDE, and we were growing this business. But as we were growing this business, we saw a really interesting opportunity, and that opportunity was in the cloud computing space. Around 2010, cloud computing really started to show some signs. But what was interesting to us at ActiveState is we saw numerous enterprises, well, actually more than numerous, we saw a real need or pain within enterprises. They were developing and testing applications, and now they wanted to easily deploy those applications to a cloud infrastructure. And we saw an opportunity here to develop a platform in order to make it really easy to deploy applications to enterprises' cloud, whether that's a public cloud, a private cloud, or a suite of clouds, depending on the needs of an enterprise. And we developed a product called Staccato, and that's what that little logo is above the box there. Staccato was a private platform as a service, and as we often said, we provided the P, the platform, so the enterprise could run the service. And we grew that business as well as the tools and languages business, and we came to a point in 2015 where Hewlett-Packard enterprises specifically really liked what we were doing around Staccato, and they acquired the entire Staccato product line. So compared to ActiveState 1.0, in this case, in ActiveState 1.0, Sophos bought all of ActiveState. In ActiveState 2.0, HP just bought the Staccato product line. That left the tools and languages product line. So if we go to the next slide, there's a common history here in ActiveState 1.0 and 2.0, or a recurring theme, I should say, and that is we end up with these silo business units. Now, in a sense, these silo business units is not necessarily a bad thing, but it does lead to some interesting dynamics in leading and growing a company. You do have a finite resources, and with multiple business units, you are competing for resources, and that is whether it's money, talent, customers, bandwidth, all these things you have with silo business units. And we felt as a company going forward that we would like to identify this silo business unit and actually try not going forward to have silo business units. So we spent a lot of time thinking about this, and the solution in our mind was a unified product stack. We said, what can we do at ActiveState that unifies our collective core competency, our successes to date, as we go forward for the next 5 to 10 years? And given ActiveState's history, and given everything I've just shared with you, we landed on the unified product stack that really made sense for ActiveState was the open source languages company. And that is the rationale for our announcement on November 1st and why the open source languages company makes so much sense. There's an incredible amount of excitement here at ActiveState for this, I would say, refocused direction. It's not necessarily a new direction, it's just a heightened focus, and the clarity of focus has brought a huge amount of excitement for all of us as activators here at ActiveState, but also some of our existing customers. So today, we have ActiveState. It's still based on open source technology. We're still focused on enterprises. We're still focused on developers. And now you can see within those three concentric circles is our core focus, the open source languages company. So at this point, I'd like to hand it off to my colleague, Tom, and Tom is going to speak about why open source languages. So over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Bart. As Bart has described, open source developers in the enterprise are the core of what ActiveState has done all the way back to the late 90s. As someone who was in academia in the late 90s, open source has always been a critical part of my professional life, both as a physicist and a software developer. What we get out of open source and what we have gotten out of open source for the last several decades is the benefit of very large communities. They're global, they're diverse, and they're robust. We have developers and communities working literally all over the world on a variety of open source languages. It's distributed, it's self-organized, and at the same time, it is very robust and very agile. Anyone who's been involved in an open source community is aware that they can be fractious, they can be contentious. There's a great deal of open and vigorous argument, and the languages that are produced by open source communities are a reflection of that process. Every decision has been considered, has been challenged. People have sometimes forked languages in communities, found better ways to do things, and then brought them back together again, which has produced a large set of mature, capable languages backed by large, diverse global communities. This is not 2 or 3 people throwing together some stuff. The organizations like Perl.org, Python.org, organizations behind Ruby, behind Lua, are worldwide and involve tens to hundreds of developers in the core of the language. So if we can go on to the next slide, we'll talk about why ActiveState open source. Open source is open. Why would you come to a company that is providing open source solutions? Fundamentally, as Bart said, this is what we have done since the late 90s. And there are problems with using open source. There are problems with enterprise adoption of open source. Fundamentally, at ActiveState, we understand how to build open source languages across a huge diversity of platforms. We not only supply open source languages on Linux, Mac, and Windows. For our enterprise customers, we do more exotic varieties, including HPUX, AIX, and Solaris. So for example, I think our most exotic build is 32-bit TcL on HPUX running on Itanium hardware. This is a considerable range of platforms that we support that you won't find in the open source ecosystem natively, because there just aren't that many people who have those needs. The people who have those needs come to us. Organizationally, we've been doing this for 20 years. We understand how to bring open source languages in, document them, organize them, package them, and ship them in a provable, repeatable process that we typically do quarterly. So we ship hundreds of varieties of Perl, for example, every quarter to enterprise customers. And we have a demonstrated history of long-term stability and a high level of trust with our enterprise customers. At the same time, we are deeply engaged with open source communities. These are the people who are producing these languages. They love these languages, and rightly so. We are a way of getting those languages into the enterprise where there might be some issues with adopting them if there isn't a strong level of external support that a company can have for that language. So if we can go on to the next slide. We have also been necessarily deeply involved in the world of software development as developers ourselves. I've been writing software professionally for over 20 years now and was an academic in computational physics prior to that. We understand as a company what developers want, because it's what we want ourselves. We want technology that just works. We want things that are easy to use. We are also necessarily in the world operating in multi-platform environments where we may need something to work on Linux today and on Windows tomorrow and AIX or Solaris the day after that. And we want, as developers, to have a consistent experience across those platforms. It is extraordinarily frustrating for a developer or an enterprise to have something that works on Windows and mysteriously doesn't on Linux, or the other way around. These are the sorts of things that mostly we don't want to worry about those problems. We want to solve the problem that we're faced with as a developer, not worry about why some esoteric aspect of a language is not behaving the same way across different platforms. And finally, we want access to the module ecosystems of our languages. And we want them, again, to just work. There are very few things more frustrating as a developer. To know that there's a module that solves the problem that I'm trying to solve that I can't get to build or behave properly on the platform that I need to target. And this is a concern that we deeply understand at ActiveState because it is one that we face ourselves very frequently. And then, if we go into the next slide, enterprises have the same concerns as developers, but more. Obviously, an enterprise wants quality assured builds. They want reliability. They want to know that when the bits are delivered, they'll work. Beyond that, they want to have someone to talk to if they don't work, someone who will be there with a service level agreement to support them and to make sure that the issues get fixed in a timely way. And when we do these fixes, we do work with the open source communities as much as possible to make sure that any critical fixes get moved back into the open source version of the software so that they're shared widely with the world. The other thing that we do as a company is support and maintain older versions of the languages. The reality is large enterprises have made heavy investments in specific versions of a variety of languages across the last decade or more, and they may not want to move the code base from Perl 5.8 up to Perl 5.22, for example. ActiveState provides secure versions of older language, or secure older versions of our languages, so that you can get Perl 5.10 with a modern OpenSSH, for example. This is a critical need for large enterprises that the average developer probably doesn't have, because we like to work with the modern versions of the language. But when you've invested a huge amount of money in a legacy code base, it makes perfect sense to stay with the older version of the language and maintain support for it. We also provide fundamentally software you can standardize on. As I said, we provide identical behavior across a variety of platforms because we're building the same versions of the same modules in the same way across all of the platforms that we support, so that enterprises, if they do want to migrate from older hardware to newer hardware while maintaining an older version of the language, can have a much higher level of confidence that everything will just work the same way. And all that adds up to faster time to market for the enterprise, whether they're building systems for internal use or they're shipping systems externally. It removes these frustrating, mysterious issues where something weird happens and now your development team has to spend a week figuring it out because you have bits that just work. Next slide, please. So we have done this for Perl, for Python, for Tcl over the last 2 decades, and this year we're announcing Ruby, Node, Go, and Lua as additions to our open source languages offering. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why those languages, if we could have the next slide. This is a graph from RedMonk that shows the number of questions about a language on Stack Overflow on one axis, and the popularity in terms of the number of projects on GitHub on the other axis. And there is a considerable diversity of popularity, unsurprisingly. Our current languages, Perl, Python, and even Tcl are shown on this graph, and they're all comfortably in the upper right-hand quadrant of the graph, where the popular languages live. You can see that Ruby, Go, and Lua are also very much in the same area. Go is, the Go data are probably no longer accurate because it is a language which is growing in popularity so very rapidly. And Node.js is a subset of JavaScript, which is obviously extraordinarily popular. So fundamentally, we first look for languages that are popular, and beyond that are core to our enterprise customers' needs and have large open source communities supporting them. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see when you look at Perl, Tcl, Python, and Komodo IDE, which we haven't talked about very much, but which is our integrated development environment that supports all of these languages. What we found is that the enterprise customers that we already have are looking at or using Ruby, Go, Lua, and Node.js, and a large number of enterprises all over the world are either already using those languages for critical business systems or are deeply engaged with them as potential growth areas for their future.
And Tom, if I can just interject before we do the poll.
Yep.
One of the things, if we can go back to the previous slide, that Tom has been spearheading is we want to tightly integrate Komodo or IDE with our language distributions. As Tom has already mentioned, Komodo does already work with these languages today, but going forward under the whole notion of the open source languages company, we want to create a complete stack of the language with a tightly integrated IDE, and Tom is going to be touching on some more features that you're going to see in the stack. Yep. But we'll move on. Sorry, Tom, I just wanted to add that.
Good to emphasize. So, which languages are people most interested in is one of the questions.
So we'd like to poll you now as our audience, and just in real time here live, get a sense of your interest of the languages you're most interested in that we have under the new ones. And we will just give you a moment here to choose your language, and then we will post the results. And pretty, there's no surprises there.
Yeah.
I would say, Tom, would you agree?
I would agree. Yeah, that is about where we have seen interest. I think Go is probably a little higher in this audience than it's been previously, but I think every day that passes, people get a little more interested in Go.
Yeah, we can say what we've seen since we launched on November 1st, there has actually been slightly higher interest outside of this audience to Ruby. That's the only, I think, meaningful difference in this audience compared to what we've been seeing, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Just wait for the next slide to get back up. So, as I said, we looked at languages that we believe already have some interest in the enterprise or have the potential for considerable future growth. So we wanted to know who is using Ruby, Go, Node.js, and Lua. For Ruby, it's not too much to say that almost anyone who has a serious web application of any kind is likely using Ruby and Rails at some point in some part of their organization. So that we see these very large, well-established organizations, the NASA's, Motorola's of the world, the Siemens, as well as some newer, younger, faster-moving organizations, all have decided that Ruby and Rails were the appropriate technology to drive some of their web applications. For Go, it is very much a cloud-focused language at the moment in terms of applications. We're seeing a huge amount of interest and uptake in microservices and other cloud-oriented businesses, although I think it has some systems capability waiting in the wings as well. For Lua, it's fundamentally an embeddable and embedded language, either in software or in hardware. So we see on the right-hand side a lot of games that have Lua embedded as a scripting language. We have in the middle some very powerful applications that have Lua built into the mix. And then on the left, we see some hardware applications. When you buy a Mercedes-Benz, in the owner's manual, apparently, there is a notice saying that this automobile contains Lua. And it's a very flexible, powerful, and relatively small language that makes it extremely useful as something to embed in other applications, be they software or hardware. And finally, Node is JavaScript on the server for a huge range of needs. And we're seeing some very large, very mature enterprises moving into node.js as a powerful and flexible tool to handle general scripting on the server side. So when we look at our new languages, we've tried to strike a balance between diverse needs. Ruby is very much web-focused. Rails will be part of our distribution. It's a well-established language. It needs support, and there are some companies out there supporting it. Gem management, which is a Ruby, gems are the Ruby packages or modules, is an ongoing problem, as it is with any open source language. There's a large ecosystem, there's a large diversity of contributors, and managing those in terms of versions and compatibilities and dependencies is always going to be a challenge for any language. And we see the same thing in Perl, in Python particularly, where ActiveState's core experience in that area can be brought usefully to bear on some of these other languages, particularly Ruby. Go, I think of Go as a language that wants to be the C of the 21st century, a well-designed, powerful systems language that has been extremely well thought out for handling a wide range of problems on modern hardware, focused on, at the moment, as I said, we're seeing a lot of a focus on microservices. It has a lot of features that I think are going to make it one of the core key languages in 21st century software development. Unlike our other languages, it is compiled. When this flag was created a few months ago, there was probably more concern about debugging and other technology around Go, but even in those few months, those capabilities have increased. But we're very excited about the rapid development of Go, which has recently gone from number 48 to number 13 in the TIOBE index of popularity, and I expect will break the top 10 in 2017. Lua is a language that's not unlike Tcl in certain respects. It's small, clean, lightweight, very popular and strategic in its industries. It may well prove to be very important in the development of the Internet of Things, as we need to increase the ease of programmability for devices near the edge. So we have smaller footprint devices. I've done a lot of embedded programming myself, all in C. It isn't one of my favorite things. It's a very difficult, very challenging environment to work in, and the potential to put a language like Lua onto a small chip so that there's a more friendly programming environment that more people can get access to is something that I think has a lot of potential in the very near future. And finally, we have Node.js on the server. I see JavaScript as having undergone an evolution that is actually not unlike what Java did in the late 1990s, where it started as a front-end language, and JavaScript has also succeeded as a front-end language, but enterprises realized they had this powerful general-purpose programming language that could also be used on the server, and there were a lot of developers available who understood the language and could now cover the full stack from the front end to the back end. So we're seeing a lot of Node adoption in the enterprise for general purpose scripting, and it has an extremely powerful ecosystem behind it, which at the same time is also extremely complicated. And like the gem environment, the more powerful these things are, the more daunting they can be for users. And ActiveState is aiming to see what we can do to make those more accessible, more amenable, and more secure for enterprise users. So what we are looking for in all of our language distributions is securing the module ecosystem, fundamentally. We have a number of ideas that we'll be talking about in the near future, what we'll be doing in those terms. As Bart alluded to earlier, Komodo IDE will be more closely integrated with our core languages. It already supports them, but we are enhancing the level of integration, improving everything from package management to debugging, especially code intel, which is always a tricky balance in an IDE. But personally, as a person who uses mostly Vim and Emacs, Komodo IDE is actually the IDE I wish I always had in terms of a powerful tool that gets out of my way. And so we are going to be improving its integration with our languages across the board. We are looking at a common package manager interface. There's obviously a large diversity of package managers out there that solve a range of problems for different languages. We're not necessarily interested in trying to make the one package manager to rule them all, but we would like to make it easier for people to access all their packages across languages. And Komodo IDE already has a unified package manager interface that we're enhancing to work more smoothly across all of our languages. We're looking at enhancing our language distribution. So what you will get with an ActiveState distribution is not just what you would get with the open source bits, but we'll have additional packages in particular, looking at what the core, most popular pieces of our various languages are, the most popular third-party modules, the modules that are most important to our enterprise and community users, and bundling those in with enhanced distributions. We're going to continue with our tradition of legacy support for the languages that we support. Our initial releases for Ruby, Node, Lua, and Go will be focused on the recent versions of the languages, but as we see demand, we are open to looking at older versions of the languages and seeing how we can support users who, for a variety of reasons, want to stay with something that was developed in the past. As always, we can provide indemnification for enterprise customers around their use of these languages. And again, as with Tcl, Python, and Perl, and Komodo IDE, we are committed to multi-platform support so that users can get the same experience from the same versions of their languages with the same modules at the same versions across a variety of popular platforms. And we're also looking at potential new platforms to support beyond the ones that we have done historically, because we have that as a core capability. Adding a platform is relatively straightforward for us. Next slide.
So I'll just jump in here, and I want to talk about our available editions. So Tom has given a real good insight of why these open source languages and what you can expect in our language distributions. What you can expect is what you have seen with our Perl, Tcl, and Python, but we're also looking at really upping the game there, and Tom has foreshadowed and just get a little hint of some of the things you can expect in the future. Now, the way we provide our languages is in 4 flavors. There's the Community Edition, the Business Edition, the Enterprise Edition, and the OEM Edition. I'd like to spend just a few minutes going through each of these editions and our philosophy behind them. So for the Community Edition, it's all about getting the language distribution out to as many developers as possible on the planet. And we literally do millions of downloads of our language distros already today. And they're always free. And the idea is we provide the most 2 recent versions of any language available free to the community for dev and testing and non-production use or non-commercial use. I think, for example, Tom, we're ActivePerl is 520 and 522 right now, soon to be 522 and 524, yep. Right? And then when we say not for production use, in our EULA, there's a key definition of what we mean by production. But if you're using it in production and it's for non-commercial reasons, it's for free. The whole notion is we want as many people on the planet to use our free Community Edition. Then we move on to Business Edition. The whole idea behind Business Edition is, actually I need to back up. Community Edition is for Windows, Linux, and Mac platforms only. Now for Business Edition, that is using it for Windows, Linux, and Mac, but you also may want to use it for the big iron systems, AIX, HPUX, Solaris. And there, it's Business Edition. It's based on low volume or small installation base for production use. It's commercially supported. As well, you get access to legacy versions. So as Tom mentioned, you may be an enterprise, you're using Perl 5.10 or 5.12 or 5.16. That is not currently freely available on our site. You can use that flavor of the distribution for an annual subscription fee. So that's Business Edition. Moving on to Enterprise Edition. This is where you're an enterprise, you're wanting to use many versions of the language distribution in production. A great example is we have a large bank. They're using ActivePerl on Windows servers and a whole bunch of AIX servers. And they standardize on ActivePerl. And then it's also, Tom mentioned, is because they standardize because they know the modules are going to work on both of the operating systems. We provide full-grade SLA-based enterprise support around the language distro, and you can now install it on a large server base, 1,000 to 2,000 servers, or whatever your needs are. And more importantly, with our Enterprise Edition, this is a situation where you as an enterprise may say, hey, ActiveState, I know your distribution has these modules, but there's these 12 modules we would like you to build and add to the distribution. And that's what we do under Enterprise Edition. So we will have a custom distribution for that enterprise with the modules that they care about. And that's what you can expect in Enterprise Edition, again, as an annual subscription. The final flavor is OEM Edition. Under OEM Edition, this is a scenario where a customer, typically a high-tech organization, would like to bundle our language distribution with their product and ship the language distribution and their product to their end user customers. So we OEM it, or original equipment manufacturer, and we package that as basically under the hood of the company's product. And in addition to that offering, what we do with that is we provide, again, if you're selling a product on multiple platforms, then you're going to be OEMing the ActiveState distribution on multiple platforms, and we provide the indemnification, the protection around open source that a lot of enterprises are constantly looking for, and we provide the support. So we keep the modules current and safe and secure. So as a bundled product, the customer that we're working with, not the end user, the customer knows that when it comes to language distribution, it's all taken care of. So in summary, going forward, you can expect to see the new languages at ActiveState, whether it's Node, Lua, Go, or Ruby, follow the same model as our traditional languages of Perl, ActiveTcl, and Python under the Community Edition, the Business Edition, the Enterprise Edition, and OEM Edition. So now I'm going to hand it back to Tom. And actually, sorry, before I hand it back to Tom, one thing that's really important to us that I want to emphasize is that we like to build things interacting with our users, our developers and enterprises. So we really encourage you to sign up for more information on the languages that you're interested in. And here are the links, the Ruby, Go, Node, and Lua. Please sign up, tell us the languages you're interested in, and we will keep you apprised of the development of these 4 languages to the extent you sign up. When you sign up, you will participate in a short survey. I think it's roughly 8 questions. That survey is really important to us. This gives you an opportunity to influence our product roadmap and how we're going to building out these products, because we want to build them with your needs in mind. We don't like to build things in isolation. So this is why we're really encouraging this sign up. So now I'm going to hand it back to Tom, because we've been talking a lot about the new languages, but we also want to talk about what's next for Perl, Python, ActiveTcl, and Komodo.
Thanks, Bart. It's an exciting time for ActiveState, adding new languages, and at the same time, we have big plans for our existing languages. As I alluded to a little bit earlier, enhancing our distributions across the languages is one of the things that we're very much focused on in 2017. And what that means for Perl, Python, ActiveTcl, and Komodo IDE is closer integration between the languages and Komodo, and that will include particularly improved code intel for all languages. We're already supporting the most recent versions of ActiveTcl, for example, in Komodo. We're enhancing our Python 3 support in Komodo, and we continue to support the latest versions of Perl. And for the language distributions themselves, we are looking at the popular modules which are most critical to our users across the board, community, business, and enterprise users, and adding those to the distributions as standard components. So in our upcoming Python releases, we are adding a number of popular test frameworks as just part of the distribution. So it's, Python has always been a batteries included distribution. There's always been an attitude in the Python community that we want a large distribution, so we are adding extra batteries to our distribution on top of that, particularly to help people who are doing test-driven development, because we've identified that through our dialogue with developers, with communities, with enterprises as an area that people would like more support in. And so what we're doing for Perl, Python, ActiveTcl, and Komodo is continuing to engage with the community of users for those languages, identifying their particular needs, and enhancing our distributions for the languages to help meet those needs out of the box. So you just install it, and all the pieces you need are right there, ready to go. And at the same time, for Komodo, we are integrating it into the language distribution so that if you download one of our languages, you will be given the option of installing Komodo IDE alongside it, which is a 21-day free trial for a community user, and is a licensed version of Komodo for a business edition user, and there's another package for enterprise edition. So that's part of what we have in store for our languages for our existing languages in the near future.
So I'd like to do another poll, and this is we won't share the results of this poll, but one thing that, as I alluded to, we really want to build things with you in mind. So if you would like more information on any of these languages, or more importantly, if you would like to engage with us in what we refer to lightheartedly as an early adopter program, meaning if you would like to speak to us and say, hey, ActiveState, for example, really interested in what you're doing with Go, have you thought about this or this or this, because that's important to us, we would love to hear from you. So if you would like to hear more information, or you would like to work with us in our early adopter program and get a frontline seat on our product roadmap, please click yes here, and then we will reach out to you. We'll just wait for that to be completed. It's just a yes or no. We're not going to publish any results on this one. So that completes the poll, and then we'll move on to the next slide. So just to recap, today, the spirit of this webinar was really to share with you why the Open Source Languages Company and how we got to this decision today. We are super excited of our focus now as a unified product solution or unified product stack around the Open Source Languages Company. You know now that ActiveState is committed to its roots, its core competency, and building out not only its existing languages, but these new languages of Ruby, Go, Lua, and Node.js. We're super excited about this going forward, and this is just the beginning of many new announcements in the months and years ahead. So at this point, I'd like to open it up to Q&A, and we have someone here that is going to now start posting questions for Tom and I. Either Tom or I will take the lead on the question, and then we will answer them. We'll keep going through as many as we can until the top of the hour. So the first question is, what are your plans to support the communities around these languages? So Tom, I'll let you lead that one.
Yep, fundamentally, we're looking at doing the sorts of things that we have done with the Python, Perl, and ActiveTcl community, where we sponsor events, we sponsor hackathons, we have in some cases provided resources for specific websites, we have provided resources for testing some features of various languages, particularly on systems like AIX or HPUX that we have access to that community maintainers of the languages may not. So there's a variety of things in that vein.
And related to that question also, Tom, we should mention that Jeff, our product manager, Jeff Rouse, rhymes with house, he is actually actively engaged right now with the Ruby, Go, Node, and Lua communities. He's out there on the community forums asking questions of how we can work with these communities to support them. So it's really our outreach to listen right now.
Yeah.
Next question. When do you anticipate releasing these languages? and then I think brackets. I think this is likely to come up. So when do we anticipate to releasing these languages? So I want to be real. I'll answer this. I want to be very careful. The plan, high level, is to release these 4 languages in 2017. What we're doing right now is we're not going to release them all at once. We are engaging with the communities, engaging with you to find out what is of interest to you, where your hot buttons are, so to speak, and then we expect to release 1 per quarter, with the first language to be released sometime in Q1, early Q2 of 2017. I don't want to give a hard date because things constantly are changing. We're getting some really interesting feedback and interest from all sorts of organizations, of small, medium, and large, and we need to put that all together in a form and come up with a roadmap that really makes sense to address the needs that you care about most. So I always hesitate to put a firm date because you always get in trouble when you set a specific date. I don't know, Tom, if you want to add anything to that?
We're also getting a lot of engagement from the various communities around the languages, and some of them are providing us with a lot of insight into where and how these languages are used in all kinds of places today, and we're taking that into consideration as well.
The next question is, do you have plans to add other languages at some point? So the high-level answer is absolutely yes, based on where the market takes us or where we think the market is going. As Tom mentioned, we spent a lot of time looking at the language ecosystem and where we could make the most difference. And we chose those 4 additional languages. There were some other languages that weren't as high priority that we may consider in the future. I don't even want to mention those languages at this point in time, but the short answer is, when we say we are the open source languages company, we mean it. And to the extent there is open source languages that we should be supporting that we're not, we will embark on that in the future. So next question, do you plan to support all platforms for all languages? I think this is a great question for you, Tom.
Yeah, it is, and the answer is it depends on demand. We will see whether or not there is significant demand for Ruby or Go on HPUX or Solaris or AIX. We are committed to supporting all of our languages on OS X, on Linux, and on Windows. Whether or not there is sufficient demand to support them on Big Iron is an open question.
Tom, is it safe to say, I mean, just speculating, it would be highly unusual to see one of these newer languages having an application developed on a Big Iron system?
It would be unusual, but it's not unimaginable, because you can imagine the situation. We know that there are enterprises that have large install bases of AIX machines, say. Mm-hmm. They may well have also a lot of Linux machines. They could develop an application in Go on their Linux machines and realize, it would be awesome if we could just scale that out to our AIX hardware. So that's a scenario that I can see coming to pass in some large enterprises.
And another scenario that Tom has talked quite passionately about is that when we talk about supporting all platforms for all languages, and he's hinted on it, there may be platforms out there today that we don't even support, but the market tells us, especially in the IoT space and Lua, there could be some platforms, and maybe Tom, you want to hint on it, that it's very likely that we could be doing a build or a port to those platforms.
Yeah, it's certainly something that I am enthusiastic about. I have a lot of background in embedded, as I said, and I would love to see support for some smaller footprint hardware. ARM is an obvious target, although I want to emphasize we don't have any plans for this yet, but we are very open to people coming to us and say, we really like Python on VxWorks or Lua on ARM or what have you, and see where the needs are for these languages, because there are, for the embedded world especially, other chipsets and other operating systems very much in play.
And related to that, and we have an internal kind of master vision for ourselves, and we don't often publicly share this, but I thought this is a good point to share this. We would like to see an ActiveState solution on every device and every planet, and that's what drives us. To the extent that we can have our language distributions on every single device on this planet would be fantastic, and that's what drives us. And when we say every planet, we mean that because, as you know, Elon Musk right now has a mission to Mars, and we would love to have our language distributions on that mission to Mars. And there are some entities I believe I can't speak to due to confidentiality reasons, but we are working with certain customers that are having devices that are leaving this planet, and that totally excites us. Next question. How far back do you plan to handle legacy support? I think Tom touched on that. Do you want to expand on that again, Tom?
Again, it's very much demand driven. We are extremely confident in our ability to build older versions of languages on older operating systems. Some of our core build machines are really quite old because our customers need native builds on those OSs. So it really comes down to demand. If somebody needs some Ruby 1. version, we would certainly be open to doing that because I'm highly confident we can.
Yeah, and related to that, that's the whole essence of our Enterprise Edition business model. Whereas Business Edition, that's really what we have on the shelf. And Business Edition can be the current languages or past languages to the extent it's on the shelf. But with the new languages, we won't have necessarily legacy versions on the shelf. But with Enterprise Edition, if there is an older version of the language that you really want that's not on the shelf, that's what we do under Enterprise Edition, because there's so much customization features available with that product offering, and that's why enterprises like working with us, is because the ability they have to mold the language and the version to their needs.
And we have a very powerful scriptable build system that allows us to say, okay, we want to build this version of this language with these modules on this hardware that allows us to turn that kind of problem around very quickly.
So you're going to like this next question, Tom. This one's definitely for you. It's your favorite topic.
Yeah.
I'll let you read it. Go ahead.
Documentation is always a hassle with open source projects. Do you have a plan for this? We do have a plan for that. Our documentation today is not quite where I would like it to be, and we are focused on resources for 2017 that will help us improve our documentation for our languages across the board.
So I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll wrap up. So the last question is, where does your Go product compare in performance for code analysis, say with Go code, compared to versus code, which is very fast, and PyCharm, which is slower and uses a lot more resources? Well, that one's definitely for you, Tom.
Yeah, that goes into a lot more technical depth than I think I can fit into the time we have remaining, and the short answer is in the middle. That's the easiest thing to say without getting completely down the rabbit hole.
And it's interesting Go is brought up because that is, as Tom has alluded, it's a very fast-growing language, and we're getting a lot of interest and inquiries around Go on many different angles.
Yeah.
So it's definitely high on our list. So to wrap up, everyone, really want to thank you today for joining us on this webinar. Thank you to my wonderful and esteemed partner and colleague, Tom, for joining us. And I really want to encourage you to remember to sign up. The links are on your screen there. More importantly, if you want to talk to Jeff Rouse specifically about aspects of what we're doing around the open source languages company and specific languages needs that you may have, feel free to reach out to him at jeffr@activestate.com, fill out the survey, and we really look forward to this journey with you in the months and years ahead. And thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.